request we'll wrap up somewhere at 4:30 or so, and we'll open floor for any kind of questions. If there is anyone who want to discuss something, then we can leave that half an hour time for discussion, but we'll wrap up at 4:30. So we covered all those details as part of yesterday's session. So we can directly jump onto the major part for today's session. So we'll take a different approach today. So we'll complete the theory part and we'll directly jump onto the practicals. So the same exact process that we have learned as part of the last session is followed even in the perimeter pen testing section, or else the actual external pen testing. So it must not create any kind of new confusions again. So the confusions that you already have from the last session are more than enough. So let's continue, or else let's wait for 2 more minutes before we begin.
Yeah.
So today's schedule will be like this. We'll start with the theory part for internal pen test, and we'll also look at perimeter pen testing concepts. And once we are done with that theory, we'll move on to the practicals. Again, we'll repeat the same exact process, but this time we'll look at how we can perform the same exact activities after gaining access to the internal network. So just to adjust the timing, I'm going to push this pivoting practicals onto the next session, because it can take a little bit more time to understand, and I don't want to rush with the concepts. So let's push this pivoting thing to the next session. And I will also help you with the lab setup for the pivoting practical, because there are labs in yes, I think you all have access to the iLabs platform, but iLabs, you will not have full control on configuring it, or else exploiting the missions based on your interest, because it is all completely fixed. Only the ones that are mentioned in the material will work there, and you will not have more scope for practice. So I will explain you on how to set up that lab next week, so that it will be easy for all of you to continue with that. And the concepts that we have learned from the last session play a key role. So please make sure that you revise those concepts and also practice the methodology that we have learned. And I hope you all have the cheat prepared, I mean the template prepared. If not, you can refer to the recorded lecture and take advantage of building up your own template, and do practice solving a lot of missions like this. So even in the real life pen test, you are allowed to carry your notes, right? You are allowed to use whatever tool that you want to, right? Based on the details that are part of the scope. So the restrictions that I have mentioned in the last class, like performing DOS attack or performing social engineering, right, may not be your choice all the time, but all other techniques that we have learned are perfectly all right. The thumb rule is any kind of attack that you are going to plan, or any kind of exploitation that you are going to do on the target mission, must not crash any services. So constantly hitting the target with Nmap is not good. So based on the techniques that we have learned from the last session, you must understand what is the target meant for. Is it a web server? Is it a file server? Is it a database server? What is the purpose of that particular server? What is it doing? You need to enumerate it. You need to understand what are the triggering points for us, so that we can gain access. So every time we may not get a comfortable exploit on Metasploit that you can simply load and run. So in those scenarios, it is very important to look back and see what are other services that are running. Say we already know that there is a way in which you can perform client-side attack. From the last class, we have seen a technique for grabbing usernames and passwords using social engineering toolkit over WAN level. but that is not always going to help us in exploiting the server because we only have IDs and passwords. But most of the times, these IDs and passwords can be used for other services. So one of the most common habit that administrators have is to set simple passwords and reuse the same passwords in the local network, right? So they may set some complex password for the services that are exposed to the internet, but in the local network, they feel like it is not that easy for someone to gain access. So they set common passwords or repeated things. So in that case, the passwords that you have grabbed from social engineering methods may help, but as I mentioned, there are other client-side attacks that you can perform. So from information gathering step, we have seen what are the tools or the softwares that the target is using. By simply triggering some script from the browser, you can figure out what are the browser extensions that are present. So if any of these extensions are exploitable, you can take advantage of running that attack over WAN level, over the internet, and gain access. And once we have information related to the softwares that are running locally on that machine, you can take advantage of exploiting that concerned software. One of those common softwares that are used for exploitation is Microsoft Office. So how is it triggered, and how you can know that the target is using Microsoft Office? We already covered this pre-exploitation part in last two sessions, where we have seen multiple methods to understand or enumerate the target. One of those techniques is to dump the documents. So on that day, we did OSINT. We gathered some documents from the websites and we enumerated them. We look at the actual metadata, and we came to know that the target organization is using Microsoft Office. So today we'll see that extension part on how we can exploit that Microsoft Office and gain initial foothold onto the target. So gaining initial foothold is a little bit tricky. So in the last class, we have seen how we can exploit the Drupal 7 to gain access, and we have seen multiple exploits for that. So we have added admin account onto that administrative panel and gained access to the admin panel. And we luckily have a remote code execution vulnerability on that. So we exploited that to gain access. So any of these exploits or the social engineering technique that I'm going to discuss today for the Office Word thing will become the initial point, initial exploitation to gain initial foothold onto the target network. Once you are inside the network, it is like the same local LAN level practicals that you are already habituated with. Performing a local network scan, identifying what are the missions that are live, what are the vulnerabilities that are existing on those missions, uploading all these exploits there and running those exploits against the target missions will help you in gaining access to all those devices. So yet another aspect to this, if there are some kind of defenses in place, of course, there will be. For example, if you are exploiting some kind of a web server or else a database server or else a local client, we all know how to use Metasploit to get a reverse connection. But do you feel that reverse connections always work? May or may not be. Especially if there is some kind of outbound rule, then the port 4444 is not going to work. So administrators will only open specific ports for outbound communication. Slight changes to the way how you configure your Metasploit will allow you to get a reverse connection. So we'll discuss all those techniques as part of today's session. So without wasting time, let's directly jump onto the actual part for today's session. As we have done with the entire methodology as part of yesterday's session. So let's complete the theory part as soon as possible and we'll move on to the practical. So module 5, 6, and 7 are all related, as I said in the last class. So 5, 6, 7, the methodology remains same. The attacks that you are going to do, right, will slightly change in the way how you configure them. Say, for example, in the Drupal 7 exploit that we did in the last class, we know that the target server is publicly exposed, so we exploited it and gained access. But what if there is a web server or else a database server within the network? You cannot have a direct connection to it. For example, me sitting here on a different part of the internet will not have access to your local device until and unless I cross your router or else some kind of external node, right, to enter your network. So all the things that we have learned in the last class should be applied on the external net to understand the defenses. Please do remember or else note down this in your notes. 80% of your success completely depends on the time that you spend in enumerating the target. The remaining 20% is just the skill that you have, right? More you enumerate, more success you will have. Somewhere around 75% to 80% of time should be spent on enumeration. That is the reason why major portion of yesterday's session is completely dedicated to enumeration. And in the last half an hour, 1 hour or so, we completed the exploitation. So it becomes very simple only if you have right amount of information in hand. So exploiting the devices that are part of the internal network is very simple if you have a full-fledged shell or a reverse connection from one of the internal devices. So one technique that we have seen in the last class is to exploit that web server and gain access. Today, we'll see on how we can perform that client-side attack to convince someone inside the organization to open the Office Word document so that we can get a reverse connection. So once we gain access to that, again, the same process, network scanning, but this time we'll do it on the target network using the shell that you already gained access to. So this is again a little bit trickier thing. Why? Say nmap will not be there on the target for sure. So target is not going to have more sophisticated frameworks for you like vulnerability scanners like OpenVAS or else Nessus. You'll not see all these frameworks installed over there. This is where you must boil down to the basic tools that generally present in any of the Linux missions or Windows missions to start with the enumeration process. This is where scripting comes in handy. If you are thorough with the Linux skills, then writing your own script for performing network scan will help you a lot. Anyhow, you no need to worry about scripts. Google is always there. You can go and copy down the scripts, but you need to understand what those scripts are doing. Right? So it is not like blindly copying that script and running that on the target. You must take advantage of customizing it in such a way that it suits our requirement. Say, take the netcat thing. So netcat is quite common in all different Linux machines. It is a basic utility that comes with core packages. So you can write a single one-liner to perform a network scan using netcat. So we have seen the netcat command, how to use the netcat command as part of yesterday's session. We can simply iterate that using a for loop to run the network scan on all different devices that are part of the local network, right? You can also go on iLabs and download certain scripts that are already part of iLabs platform for performing network scan, right? Using a shell script or else a Perl script or a Python script. Anyhow, GitHub is a good resource where you can get a lot of scripts. And when you are going on searching for content, I highly recommend you to read it well, understand what it is doing, right? And then customize it and put that into your resource section, right? So you must always have your notes in hand, right? So note down what you are doing and also copy all these scripts and make sure that you have your mission ready with all these scripts. So there is nothing like you must use the latest operating system or you must use something that is advanced one. Any operating system that you're using, as I mentioned, if you are confident with Kali Linux, use Kali Linux. If you are confident with Parrot, you can use Parrot, right? So CPENT exam is also the same kind. There is no restriction. You can use whatever operating system you want. This is what happens even in the real world. You can use whatever operating system that you want. In fact, you can use your Ubuntu machine also, right? Set that you have all the tools or the frameworks that you need are properly installed. If the tools and frameworks are not installed, you know what happens. Yesterday we tried cloning that Droop scan, and it didn't work for us because of package related issues, right? So during your pen test, you'll not have much time to fix all those issues. So you must always make sure that all the tools are already loaded and properly working. So once you are done with that, and any kind of tool that you want to transfer onto the target, right, you must do so. So you gained initial access, you wrote you are writing a simple network scan script, and you can simply run that network scan on the target, or you can try uploading your tools onto the target. So I will share few techniques with all of you today so that you can learn the methodology or else technique of how to upload them onto the target. So file sharing is very, very, very important. So you are outside the network and the target is inside the network. So you may not have physical access to that computer. In that case, you must transfer it onto the target somehow using a web server, or else somehow using the shell that you already have access to, and so on. And most important aspect to this file sharing is to see what technique works. I hope you all know how to set up Apache web server and then transfer files using Apache web server. But what if the firewall blocks the incoming communication and outgoing communication, right? What if port 80 itself is blocked? In general, port 80, 8080, 53, or 21, right? You will see these ports open, or DNS 53, right? These ports open. But what if there is a restriction of not allowing you to communicate back and forth using any of these ports? Then you must look for some other way. Luckily, if you have MetaBitter access, you can use upload command to upload the file over there. So MetaBitter will take care of doing all those jobs. But if it is not the case, then again, we will be into trouble. So you can start some kind of Python server on a specific port and check. Again, how you will know which ports are allowed, which ports are not allowed, using firewalking technique that we have learned in the last class. So everything is interrelated. That is why these three chapters or these three modules of this course are very critical, very critical. So once we are done with the network scan, again port scan, the same kind of technique that you have used for network scan. So if you are going with netcat, so take advantage of doing port scan using netcat. And once you know what are the ports that are open, then the service enumeration. So when I say service enumeration, you can take advantage of Nmap, but if Nmap is not present, yesterday we saw that using netcat, you can make a connection to the port that is open and try to retrieve the banner. So if you can see the banner with the version details, it's more than enough. You no need to run the Nmap scan. So make sure that you do the research well before you start using tools against your target. Of course, these all restrictions will apply only if you are doing it from external world. I mean, in case of external pen testing, as part of internal pen test, you will have access to the internal resources, right? You will be inside the network, right? You no need to bypass all these restrictions, but I am just giving you the simply revising the things that we learned from the last class. That's it. So service enumeration, exploitation, and post-exploitation. So after completing the exploitation step, whatever activity that you do will allow you to penetrate into other devices on the network or perform privilege escalation, right? Or you may gain access to some sensitive secrets. So please note down these three things into your running notes as part of post-exploitation step. So in yesterday's session, we have seen how to prepare the document. And at the end of the document, you can write down these 3 points. Like first thing that you must check is what kind of access you have after exploitation. Is it a user level access or a privileged user access? If you have a normal user access, no doubt you must do privilege escalation. because most of these attacks work only from the privileged state. For example, today we'll discuss about Active Directory. So if you want to do the domain related enumeration, you must be an administrator on that network, at least on one single device, right, that you compromised. You must become administrator. Then only you will be able to proceed with any kind of tools or use techniques for enumerating the domain users or find out more details related to the user permissions and so on. So performing privilege escalation is very, very important. Second post exploitation step is to take advantage of looking at network cards. So if the target device that you have compromised is dual homed, means there are multiple interfaces, then you can check on what are the devices connected to those interfaces. So this time, instead of performing network scan on the default interface, you will also try performing network scan on the other interfaces, right? So we'll see on how to perform this as part of the next session in pivoting concepts on pivoting and double pivoting section. So that becomes yet another post exploitation step. So if there is a new interface and if that new interface is connected to a different network, you can use some pivoting concepts. You can do some SSH tunneling or else some kind of dynamic tunneling or remote tunneling or local tunneling, right? To take advantage of communicating with other devices which are hidden from you with a normal access that you have onto the network. And the third thing that you must do is to search for files and enumerate services. Say, enumerating services by simply performing nmap scan on other devices is one part. But after gaining access, enumerating services on the device that you have compromised will also help you a lot. For example, if you can check what are the jobs that are scheduled, right? You may take advantage of using those jobs for privilege escalation, right? In the last class, we have seen how to perform privilege escalation abusing sudo permissions. And we have seen how we can perform this using SUID bit, abusing SUID bit files, right? And we can also take advantage of kernel version to perform privilege escalation. Most of the Linux machines or Windows machines, right, are vulnerable because of not updating or patching them with latest bug fixes. If the kernel that is running, or the core part for the operating system, is outdated, then you can easily get some exploit code. Running this exploit code, you can elevate your privileges. Today we'll see some privilege escalation techniques. But do remember, these three things will help you a lot in proceeding further after gaining access to the target. So when you are part of the internal network, you can you don't need to worry about bypassing defenses, but you need to enumerate what is present inside the network so that you can take advantage of exploiting or gain access to some hidden networks and so on. Are you getting my point? So the same exact steps, but from a different point of view. We already covered all these techniques as part of the last session. So you can take advantage of skipping ping so that you can bypass certain restrictions that are present. So do apply multiple techniques and see which thing works for you, right? So simply performing a ping scan may not help you in identifying the right devices that are live on the target network. Next thing is to go and take advantage of performing TCP discovery or UDP discovery, because those things may work at times, even if your still scan or TCP connect scan is not working. So after live host identification, if the TCP scan or else ping scan is not working, you can take advantage of ARP scan. I hope you all know Net Discover. So have you used Net Discover as part of the previous module? If yes, please drop yes. Yes. Very good. So you can use Net Discover, or you can use ARP scan, or you can use tons of other tools, right? Say there is HPing3 that you can use for network scan. right? So yesterday we saw HPing3 for port scanning. You can also use it for network scanning, right? So taking advantage of ARP, you can identify hosts, right? Because you are part of the internal network now. So if you are not part of the internal network, then ARP may not be your option because ARP works only on local network, right? LAN level protocol. So ARP is one option. And this is one thing that you must do if you are going to plan on writing CPENT exam. So again, I'm answering this question, which I receive on frequent basis, right? On my LinkedIn and other platforms. Why you are not able to see the device? Why your scan is not returning any kind of IP addresses? Do remember by default ping is blocked, right? So don't stick yourself to one single technique. Try to understand what are other things that you can use as an alternate for this and make use of that to identify all those devices. So you can note down this point also into your running notes. If you are doing external pen test, then ICMP, right, is the protocol that you can use for performing network scans. If you are doing internal pen test, as you are inside the network, you can use ARP, right? So this is what Nmap also does. Nmap with smallest small n option, ping scan option. If you provide private IP address, Nmap will perform scan using ARP. If you provide public IP address, Nmap will perform this with the help of ICMP. Is smart enough to choose between these two things based on the IP address that you mentioned. So that is very important point to be remembered for network scans. All right, so once you are done with network scan, identifying vulnerability and exploiting services. So this time you are inside the network. So the enumeration part, I mean, what services to enumerate and what are the ways in which you can gain access. Especially if it is a Windows environment, you will see this SMB service, NetBIOS running. If you are seeing SMB, then try to connect to that SMB port and retrieve some secrets that are placed inside that SMB directories or shared directories. Of course, this is quite common in any of the Windows environment. So file sharing, right? So this becomes one of the most important or else a critical service that you can enumerate to gain initial foothold into Active Directory environment also. So in Active Directory, all are Windows machines. Windows machines by default will have these ports 445, 139 open. If that is the case, you can directly take advantage of enumerating those SMB services and taking advantage of exploiting or else gaining access or connecting to that services and see if you can upload some files or download some files. So apart from SMB, what are the other services that you can find in the local network? It is network file system, some kind of mounting that you can do with the disks that are present. So if you see some kind of NFS shares, then you can mount to the target and then start retrieving some kind of files or directories that are present in it. So these are the two common techniques that you can use, right? If you are inside the network. Apart from that, there can be some vulnerabilities associated with these services. SMB is really a good point to start because these SMB versions that are running on the target mission are mostly vulnerable. Got it? So if this SMB service, pardon?
Are you showing the slide with vulnerability, exploit, and payload? No?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, fine. Yeah.
All right. So if it is an SMB service, most of these SMB services have a exploit available. So I hope you all heard about Eternal Blue, right? One of the very popular one back in 2017. But there is no surprise that the same exact vulnerability is still present on most of the devices because most of the Windows environments have Windows 7, right? So not all organizations switch to Windows 10. Even if you have Windows 10, right, there is some kind of SMB version configuration, right, that you can exploit. In fact, the eternal blue works if SMB version 1 is set. So by default, Windows comes with SMB version 2, but maybe because of some kind of requirement, they may have configured it to run on SMB version 1. If it is running on SMB version 1, you can take advantage of exploiting it to gain initial foothold. So enumerating SMB service becomes one of the crucial things as part of internal pen test. Again, how to gain access? You can go with the manual process or use Metasploit. Metasploit will make your job very simple, but there are key points that you must remember when you are using Metasploit. So Metasploit comes with tons of different modules that you can use. It can be exploit, payload, auxiliaries that we frequently use. Apart from this, encoding your payloads is very, very, very important. I hope you all used MSF Venom before. So have you used MSF Venom? If yes, please drop 1 in the chat. Very good. And I hope you also heard about MSF Venom encoders, right? So you can actually use encoding option to encode your MSF Venom payload. Yes, very good. So when you encode the payload, right, it is going to bypass the restrictions that are there on the target or firewall, or if you are lucky enough, it can bypass the signature based detection of antivirus that is running on the target machine. But one thing that will miss during this process is starting a handler on your Metasploit. You must encode that handler too, especially if you are using reverse payloads. Let's talk about this. So if it is a remote exploit, you can directly gain access to the target, right? And if that remote exploit is going to give you higher level privileges, then you're lucky enough. Something like SMB exploit, I mean, Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue is a remote exploit. You no need to have initial foothold onto the target to perform this exploitation. I mean, it is not a post exploit, right? It is a remote exploit, not local exploit. I hope you all know the difference between local exploit and remote exploit. So when you run this exploit on the target, you will get the initial access. Luckily, if it is MS17010, which is Eternal Blue, then you will get administrator access. With that administrator level access, you can actually start performing the enumeration on users, groups, domain, and so on. But not all exploits are the same kind. In few cases, you must do some kind of privilege escalation. Same as what we have discussed in Linux missions. Even in case of Windows, you can do privilege escalation because of old version of the kernel or any kind of misconfiguration that is present on the Windows machine. So bad file permissions, or you can actually abuse certain privileges that are provided for the current user and so on. So at this stage, if you are trying to use a reverse connection, even for this Eternal Blue, if you are using a reverse payload, let's talk about the payloads first. So if you are using some kind of remote exploit and the reverse payload associated with it, it means you are trying to send the base code, I mean the initial payload onto the target. So Metasploit, exploit combined with payload, you will, once you run exploit command, you are sending both the things onto the target. So once the exploit is exploited, right? Once the exploit code executes, the actual vulnerability will be triggered and it executes the payload. After executing payload, if the payload is a reverse payload, it must come back and connect to the attacker device. This is the concept of reverse payload, right? If you are not going to handle this reverse payload correctly, then there is a chance that you can miss out on getting a reverse connection, or the defenses can detect it and you will never ever get the communication back. What to do at this point? Whenever you are using a reverse payload, you must actually take advantage of setting encoding for the handler also, because Metasploit will not send the entire code onto the target, right? So it again depends on what kind of payload you are using. Is it staged or else non-staged, right? If it is a staged payload, obviously it sends only the initial part of the code. The next portion of the code will be injected only after establishing the connection with the target. So taking advantage of encoding that particular payload is also important. I mean, after establishing the stage, the code that you are injecting onto the target must also be encoded. We'll see practicals for all these things as part of today's session, right? So remote exploit, please note down these points also into your running notes. Remote exploit, local exploit. What is considered as a remote exploit? Exploit that actually gives you the initial access. So the eternal blue one. What is local exploit? Any exploit that you run after gaining access to the target mission. So any post exploitation module that is present in Metasploit, right, can fall under this local activities. So if you are using some kind of exploit after gaining access, then it is a local exploit. So you can actually do all these things even from the external world, right? If you can configure port forwarding and take advantage of convincing the target inside the network to run the payload to get a reverse connection. So talking about bind shell and reverse shell. As you can see on the screen, bind shell and reverse shell. Which thing is perfect? There is nothing like this is perfect, that is not perfect. Why? In few scenarios, reverse shell is convenient and you may get success. But in few scenarios, reverse shell may not work. In that case, obviously you must go with bind shell. In most of the scenarios, bind shell will not work. Let me tell you the reason why. Most of the firewall restrictions will be applied for all incoming traffic. Taking a generic example, if someone is trying to enter our premises, we'll keep a keen eye on what is happening, who is coming in, right? What is that they are going to do. But any outgoing traffic, if there is someone who is leaving our premises, will not put a serious restriction there. So if there is no restriction, I mean outbound rule, outbound restriction, then reverse payloads are perfect choice. But if there is some kind of outbound restriction also, then bind payload may be your choice. But if you are using a bind shell, there is yet another problem. If there is something coming towards this particular port, it will allow you to connect. But what if the target have some kind of monitoring software that will constantly check for any unauthorized ports that are open and it closes all these ports? So based on the bind payload that you set for the Metasploit exploit, you exploited the target, you gained initial, you completed the exploitation, means you established a port on the target. Now it is your turn to go and connect to that port. By the time you are trying to connect to that port, right, the target actually killed that particular port because it suspects that there is something wrong and a new port which is not started by the administrator is running, so it will close that port. So each and every technique will have its own pros and cons. So which one to use at what time, it is your choice. So note down all these differences. The first difference is remote exploit, local exploit. The second thing is bind shell or reverse shell. which one to use. Each exploit will choose its own choice for bind or reverse. You can actually change this according to your requirement. This again depends on what kind of defense is present on the target. Enumerating what kind of defenses are present is first thing before you go with the exploitation. So looking at reverse shell and bind shell, the next thing that you must decide is what kind of payload to use. Is it staged or non-staged or stageless? What is difference between staged and non-staged? So in case of staged payload, you'll not send the entire code at once, right? So when you run exploit command, the exploit along with the payload will go on to the target. After exploitation, the initial portion of the code will be executed. And this initial portion will establish a reverse connection with you. Now the actual Metasploit framework will send the Meterpreter related code. Now you will get the Meterpreter establishment. Whatever command that you are running inside Meterpreter, only after you run that command, this particular code will be sent onto the target. For example, from Meterpreter, you are trying to run a keylogger. Once you run keyscan_start, then this keylogger related code will be sent onto the target. It is like constant exchange between the client and the target, your attacker device and the target. So staged payloads are that kind. So whenever you are using staged payloads look something like this. You will see // so Windows /Meterpreter /reverse_TCP. This is a staged payload. So in case of stageless payload, everything is sent as one single payload, right? So if there is no size restriction, then stageless payload is a comfortable one. You'll send all this particular Meterpreter code onto the target at once. So once you establish the connection, you can start performing whatever command that you want on the target without any trouble. So exploits, what kind of exploits? So let me repeat the things once again. So first thing that you must understand about exploitation, what kind of exploitation? Is it remote or local? Remote or local, right? This is the next thing that I said. Is it a bind or reverse? Bind or reverse payload that you are using. Next, is it a staged payload or stageless payload? Right? So there is yet another broad classification that you can note down. Is it a server-side attack or client-side attack? So can anyone tell me the difference between server-side attack and client-side attack?
Server side is directly attacking a service that is hosted in any particular network, like example, a web server or a Tomcat or IAS server or any what is that published. Client side is something like a target of the end user of any particular organization or an entity or any person, individual.
Very good, very good. You are correct. So the one that we did in the last class, like Drupal one, it is a server-side exploitation, right? So client-side thing is like involving the client in the entire process. So client must do something for us, then only we can gain access. Very good. You are correct, Mr. Muthu. So let's proceed with the practical part, right? Before we move on to the theory part for the next module, right? So we already did this privilege escalation as part of the last session. Before we move on to the Active Directory section, let's do the practical part for what we have discussed so far. So to perform this, very first practical, I'm gonna boot my Windows 7 machine and also Metasploitable 2 device. So you can take advantage of hosting your own Windows, right, for doing all these practicals. So I recommend you to have your own Windows 7 and Windows 10. So we will be installing the concerned softwares on the target devices for doing all these acts. So Windows 7, which is the same pirated version. So this particular Windows 7 mission, I will show you that the firewall is turned on, right? So we are going to do this exploit after the firewall on the device that is there with firewall turned on, right? So the underlying concept of any of these exploit is to exploit the vulnerability in the service. To access this service, obviously, administrator will allow that service through firewall. So you no need to worry about firewall rules that are written. So you must always take advantage of looking at what is the exact vulnerability that is existing on the target machine. So to perform, before we proceed with that, proceed with this exploitation, let's take advantage of doing a quick enumeration on the target. So if I figure out what is the service IP address, it is 228. Let me boot my Metasploitable 2 also, one Linux machine and one Windows machine. So let's quickly perform a network scan. So I can take advantage of Angry IP scanner. I hope you all heard about Angry IP scanner.
Yes.
I think I don't have Angry IP scanner. I need to, oh, it's there. Very good. So I have IP scanner. So let's quickly run Angry IP scanner and see what are the devices that are up and running. So before we proceed, let's display only the machines that are live hosts only. So router. So these tools will work fine as part of internal pen test because we don't have any kind of restrictions, right? We can see our Windows machine. We can see our own device, and I'm also able to see my Mac. In fact, if I take advantage of doing a ping on my Mac, so which is at 177, 192.168.0.177, you will see it is not going to respond because I configured my Mac not to allow or not to respond for any ICMP messages. But if I try doing it with AR ping, right? So AR ping on 192.168.0.177, as you are using ARP, you need to go with sudo root privileges. So you can see it is responding. This is the reason why the Angry IP scanner have options where you can choose what technique to use, right? If I change the technique, then port scanning technique, then it is going to work only for the one that you choose. For example, you can actually go with TCP mode or UDP mode, right? Or ICMP mode. You can also maximize the number of probes and so on. So don't always stick to one single tool. Try to experiment with multiple tools. And in case of local pen test, I mean LAN level pen test, I also recommend doing it with passive mode of net discover. So if I run net discover, right, with -p on my interface, -i eth0, this will run in passive mode. I keep on forgetting this. So this will run in passive mode. You are not sending any kind of packets to the target. This is very important as part of our process, right? So if there is some kind of broadcast message that is coming towards your interface, it is going to record that. See, in this scan, we didn't send any kind of ARP packets onto the target. This is less stealthier when compared with the direct ARP scan that we actually do. Only if the target is communicating with someone else in the network, right? Obviously, that device requires the other device's MAC address. We all know the concept of ARP. So it will send some broadcast packet, and the broadcast packet hits your device also, your interface also. So if you are receiving some broadcast packet from an IP address, obviously that machine is up and running. So passive technique of ARP scan can help. One more thing that you can do. You all know that this is a Windows environment. For example, in case of CPENT active range, right? They will indicate that this is active directory range, and they will give you a scope. I mean, they will give you a network section. And once you are inside the network section, you know that active directory means most of the machines in that network will be of Windows. Of course, you can attach your Linux machine also to the active directory or DC, but most of those machines will be of Windows only. If it is Windows, you know that SMB port will be open. How about running a NBT scan or enum for Linux? So you can take advantage of NBT scan to see mission related details. So NBT scan with -v option, or else you can check what are the options that are present. Okay, let's run this one. So it prints results, right, which are script friendly. You will be able to know host related names too. This is very interesting. So instead of running Angry IP Scanner or Ping Scan, I recommend you running this one if you know that most of the machines in the network are Windows. So -s:192.168.0.1/24. Right? The chances are the Windows machines will respond back, or any other device that is there with this NetBIOS port running, you will be able to see the responses from there. So if you are able to see the responses, it means that these two devices are live. You no need to do the network scan or ping scan or ARP scan to identify. You are able to see the mission name, right? What type of mission it is. So this NetBIOS code will tell you what type of mission it is. Say if it is 20U, right? I think it is a host, a workstation. So if it is something like 003, I think it is file sharing server. Google is always there for us, right? NetBIOS codes. So if it is 00, it is a workstation. So if it is 03, messenger service is running, right? So there is a file server. You can actually know what type of machine it is with these codes. In fact, I'm telling you the secret. In CPENT exam, there are certain questions that you can easily answer. They will ask what is the NetBIOS code for so and so service, right? Or else they may also ask you what are the codes that are displayed when you perform NetBIOS enumeration on this particular network, right? By simply observing this, you can tell. So what is the host name? You may not have direct connection. So when you perform an Nmap scan on the target, you will see that it rejects that Nmap response. It rejects that Nmap scan. You will not see any kind of response, but it will respond for this NBT stat, right? And you will identify the host name here itself. So this is one common thing that you must keep in mind. Always think about the basic tools first, then proceed with the convenient tools like Nmap or Metasploit or any other exploitation framework or any other complex or any other convenient or more sophisticated tools later. So from today onwards, you make it a practice. Try to see if there is any easy alternate for this instead of using the more sophisticated tool. Do a little bit of Googling. See if there is some kind of script someone written and hosted on Git. So clone that. Try to experiment with that. If it is working, put that into your database. Next time when you come across the same kind of situation, use that one. So this is how I follow learning new things on daily basis, and I think that really helps you a lot. So performing network scan using ARP, NetDiscover, or else NBT scan, right, will give you some details. Not only that, if this enum for if this SMB port is open, you can use enum for Linux to enumerate usernames. What is the purpose of enumerating usernames? There can be certain services that you can access by simply knowing username. Why? Yesterday you only told me that the password for Jack, right? So there is a possibility that the same password can be used, same username is used as password, same username in the reverse order can be used as a password, right? And there can be some anonymous logins, that's a different story altogether. But having some usernames in hand can help you in doing brute forcing also. If you can guess usernames, you can use some kind of common word list to do brute forcing. I think you all know Hydra, Medusa, and all, right? So you can take advantage of enum for Linux, but do remember this only works if there is SMB service running, right? So enum for Linux will not work on HS box that I've shared because there are only 3 ports open and they are related to SSH, FTP, and HTTP. And as there is no enum for Linux, there is no SMB port that is open, there is no way that enum for Linux work. That is the reason why even in the aggressive scan that we performed on that box, we are not able to see operating system details, host name and all. But if I do some kind of aggressive scan on Windows, so let's do that. I think firewall is turned on. We may not get much details. Let's perform that aggressive scan on one side and we'll switch to enum for Linux. It is 228, right? Nmap aggressive scan on 192.168.0.228. Let's add sudo and see what it can written. In the meanwhile, let's move on to enum for Linux. So let's do enum for Linux, right? On this Linux machine, Metasploitable 2. Is 207. So I can go with all option to perform everything, user enumeration, password, policy enumeration, and so on. So 192.168.0.207. Lot of details. So you can see some common information. Of course, these are all not the actual usernames. These are all common names that you can find on any of the operating systems. So administrator is a common administrator and guest are common in case of Windows, right? Root is common in case of Linux. So this particular user is common if there is Kerberos authentication, if it is part of the domain. And we got the NBT scan result. So in case of Linux, it is NBT scan. And if you are running it on Windows, it is NBT stat, right? So NBT stat and NBT scan. So please note down the differences. So I executed NBT scan before on Linux machine. If I want to do the same from Windows, then I must use NBT stat. NBT stat -capital A or so. So let's see -A 192.168.0.207. So NBT stat here. So on Windows, you can use NBT stat, and on Linux, you can use NBT scan. So moving further, you can see the operating system details, operating system version, and so on. You have a lot of usernames displayed. These are all, not all usernames can be interesting, right? You can pick only the specific usernames that are of use. Say MSF admin is a user account that may have a shell. Tomcat may have a shell, right? Specific to a service. And we have few other, pardon?
MySQL was running.
MySQL is also running. You can also take advantage of service level accounts. And moving further, are you observing the shares? SMB is open, means for sure there will be some kind of shares. And if these network shares are open for everyone, anyone can access, it's okay, fine. But what if anyone can read and write on these shares? That is a little bit tricky. I mean, that is going to be your triggering point. If you can read and write to these shares, you can upload some malware there. And you can trigger that malware from web application to get a reverse connection. There are multiple opportunities for you to do so. So these are all things that you need to remember. So I will show you on how you can take advantage of all these services in a short while. So you can see the temp share is available, options directory. So temp, we have listing available. I mean, you can list the files and directories that are present in it. And moving further, you have password policy. Now, you know the minimum password length of any user there is 5. Now you can start guessing what may be the password. And again, the password complexity is also set to 0, right? So there is no way that the target administrator restricted users or else imposed a rule saying that your password must have capital letters, small letters. If there is no restriction, trust me, most of the employees will set the password very simple, because setting password is a complex thing, right? So we always try to take advantage of using the same word or else use a specific pattern, right, for all our passwords. How many of you have this habit of setting your password with this pattern, like something at the rate something? Hello? The first something can be your name. The next something can be your name or their date of birth. Hello? So by simply doing some kind of information gathering or OSINT techniques, I can easily guess what can be the password. And moving further, we can also see all different users domain IDs, I mean SIDs. So if it is part of Active Directory, each and every user will get a unique SID. This will differentiate each and every user on the Active Directory domain, right? That's it. But what if I do the same on my Windows machine? Windows machine is running at 228. Am I right? I think so. Bad memory. $228. So in this case, I was not able to get much information because the SMB service is running, but the incoming connections are not allowed. You can see most of the information failed. There are no shares, right? File sharing is not enabled. But I'm able to see BT stat related details, but not much than that. I'm not able to see the usernames, password policies, and so on, because file sharing is not enabled on that server, even though the port is open. So we have two scenarios here. In case of Metasploitable 2, we have that port open and file sharing already set. And in this case, we have this service running, but sharing is not set. Okay, let's see on how we can utilize these services and exploit them. So we did the enumeration part. Let's exploit these services. You can also take advantage of doing even more enumeration on these services using Nmap scripts and so on. Or else let's run one more Nmap script before we proceed with the exploitation, so that we can get more idea about the target and its details. So one of those scripts that I always run is SMB OS discovery. This is very important. Most of your exam related questions will be there in this result only, right? So there are few challenges in the CPENT exam that you can easily answer by running OS discovery, right? No one will tell you that this is the scan that you must run. It will be there in iLabs, but you don't know that at what time we must run. So please make sure that when you are inside the network, right, when you see SMB service, These are the scans that you must run. So locate star.nsc grep smb. There are so many SMB scripts. You can simply run all these scripts at once by simply specifying smb-star. Right? So it will run all these scripts. So of course, certain scripts require some IDs and passwords. Say, for example, brute forcing script require your username and password if you want to use a customized word list. If not, it will take a default word list from Nmap and then run that there. The one that is very interesting is this SMB OS discovery. This will give you more details about the host. Is it part of the domain? Is it a simple workstation? So let's run that. Nmap tag script and specifying that script. And I don't want to spoil the entire process by running all port scan or 1000 port scan. So specifying the port number. And I'm also going to run version detection scan on 192.168.0.228. Let's see what it results. So as part of all ports, aggressive scan that we did. So even though the firewall is open, you can see these are the ports that are open. And you can also see that I think firewall is turned off. That is the reason why I'm seeing much detailed information. Let's check. Oh, okay. We'll turn this on later. For now, you can see it completely provided the details like Windows 7 Ultimate, Service Pack 1. So you have computer name and it is not part of the domain. It is just a workstation. And you can also see that messaging service is disabled. So SMB2 security mode is also there. Can proceed further onto the details of trace route to see how many nodes are there between you and the target, right? Especially if it is in the same local network, but on a different section of the network. So I think even this one will return the same result, right? So SMB scan. Now let's turn on the firewall and see what kind of results that we'll get. So in the exam, we will not know whether the firewall is turned on. I mean, why we are not getting results, right? So setting up your own lab will give you full control on checking what kind of results will appear if the firewall is on, what kind of results will appear if the firewall is turned off. So turned on the firewall. Let's rerun the scan. And meanwhile, let's open one more terminal and run this SMB scan on our Metasploitable 2. I'm going to run this specific scan on Metasploitable 2, which is at 192.168.0.207. Of course, this failed because I need to skip this ping. Right? Are you observing that? There is no detailed information related to port 445. So the chances of we getting this particular exploit working there on the target is less this time. Only if this specific port is allowed or else allowed through firewall, right? For inbound communication, then we may get more information. So in case of Metasploitable 2, as there is no firewall setup, you can see I'm able to get the computer name, OS version, and it is part of a domain, right? We are able to see the domain details. Now let us go on to the firewall settings, right? And if you read through the description of the firewall, all the inbound rules are applied, but the outbound rules are not applied. We were talking about reverse connections, right? As there are no outbound rules, I mean, all outbound connections are allowed. There is no restrictions applied. So if all outbound rules, outbound connections are allowed, you can use reverse connection without any trouble. but incoming connection will be troublesome. Right? Before writing a rule onto this input section or inbound rules, let's see how we can actually trigger the vulnerability that is existing on this target. I think you all got the idea. Even if I go and perform some kind of vulnerability related scan on this target, I will not get anything now. Because this is the target mission is blocking all inbound communication. So even for exploiting the target, so based on the previous result, we can see that Windows 7 Ultimate Service Pack 1. So there are high chances that this target is vulnerable for Eternal Blue exploit. Right? So let's go and see on how we can make it possible to exploit this target. At first, let's leave that firewall as it is with the restrictions and see what kind of messages that Metasploit display. Will it allow us to exploit the target? If yes, what kind of access we'll get? If it is not allowing us to exploit the target, what kind of messages that it display? So let us start our PostgreSQL service, sudo service PostgreSQL start. And start MSF console. So on MSF console, I'm gonna search for Eternal Blue. You can see the 0th one is the Eternal Blue exploit. You can also use auxiliary to check whether the target is really vulnerable for remote code execution or not. If I run this particular auxiliary right now, it will check whether the port is open or not, if I can connect or not. If it is able to connect and check, then it will display that it is vulnerable. If not, it must display that the target is not vulnerable. Let's see what happens if I run this auxiliary first. Or else you can run info and check what is this auxiliary going to do. So uses information disclosure to determine if this has been patched or not. So this is what we are looking for. Obviously, we need to set the target details here. Set our host 192.168.0.228. If I'm not wrong, that's the IP address. Now tell me, are we going to set any kind of payload here? Yes or no?
No, we are not going to set the payload.
No.
Very good. Very good. You are correct. So we are not going to set any kind of payload here. This is an auxiliary that is used to check whether the target is vulnerable for this or not. Let's run this particular module. We are expecting that it must not provide any kind of details, or else it must say that the target is not vulnerable. So let me cross check, is that IP address correct? 228. Very good. Can see the connection timed out. I'm not able to make the connection towards the target mission. How can you think about exploit or checking about exploit? Right? Obviously, this confirms that even if we go with the exploit code, Eternal Blue exploit code, we will not get success. Now let us change the rule a little bit. Administrator want people to use this file sharing technique. Administrator enabled file sharing. Even after enabling file sharing, if they are not enabling the rules in the firewall to allow users to connect to this, right, it will not work. So what we must do, you must head towards the SMB rules. A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. There are no SMB related rules. Let's write a rule. So I'm going to add a rule. I think SMB file sharing is not enabled. That is the reason why you're not seeing the rule there. Let's write a rule to allow all inbound connections to the port 445. So that is the actual triggering port. So program or port, I want to go with the port. So next thing, it is TCP. What is the port that you want to allow? 445. So next, allow the connection on all different ranges. Can be domain, private, or public. So let's set this as SMB some description, finish. We enabled the rule. Now let's check. Very good. Host is likely vulnerable. Please note that in this scenario, file sharing is not enabled, but the service or the port that is open, right, is allowing incoming connections. How can you know that whether the file sharing is enabled or not? For example, you can use SMB client. I hope you all know SMB client. So SMB client will allow you to see or list all different file shares, same as our enum for Linux thing, right? So SMB client with hyphen capital L will list all the file shares. So if I do it on 192.168.0.207, which is Metasploitable 2, as anonymous user, I can list all the file shares. Will I be able to do the same on my Windows machine? No. As an anonymous user, you cannot do it. Anonymous login is successful, but authentication will fail because you are not allowed to see anything. In fact, there is no kind of file sharing. File sharing itself is not enabled. So there is no way. But still the port is open. Understanding the configuration is very, very important. That is the reason why setting up your own lab and then doing this practice will allow you to guess what may be there on the target, what may be the rule that is written on the target, right? So this is really troublesome, right? So if we are not there with any of these ideas, when you perform an attack, you know that the port is open, you will run the attack, but your attack will fail. So same as what we have seen in this case. So we know that the port is open, but when we run this attack or when we check the vulnerability, it is telling that it is not vulnerable. Now our mind will be ticking like, why this attack is not working? You'll waste most of your time moving there, right? Try to understand. If the vulnerability, if the port is open, that doesn't mean that the vulnerability is still there. And even if it is running a vulnerable service, it is not possible for you to get a reverse connection all the time, right? Let's tweak our firewall and accordingly do the attack. So now let's load the actual module, which is going to perform the privilege escalation. Sorry, perform the exploitation and see if we can get some success. So show options. We are going to set our host value as 192.168.0.228. My dear friends, I think you already know all this module Metasploit good enough from the previous module. That is the reason why I'm going a little bit fast with Metasploit. I hope you are able to understand. And in this case, we configured our Metasploit payload with reverse payload. This is the default thing that Metasploit chooses. If you're using latest versions of Metasploit, MSF6, or later versions of MSF5, this is the default behavior. It will pick some default payload. But if you are using something that is before MSF5, then you need to manually configure that Metasploit payload. Anyhow, you can run show payloads to see what kind of payloads are available and then choose the right one that can help you in gaining the level of access that you want. So let's hope for the best, fingers crossed. We don't know whether the attack works or not, whether we can get the reverse connection or not. It seems like we may get success. Very good. If we are successful, we will be able to see a new meter. If not, we must again recheck where it went wrong. Up until this particular point, we know how to use Metasploit. We can actually trigger the vulnerabilities by simply running that exploit on the target. But now, when there is a defense, you must understand how we can take advantage of bypassing the defense to get success. So attack failed. So we allowed only inbound connection. Do remember, right? So in the outbound section, everything is allowed, right? So we go on to the main section. Outbound connections that do not match a rule are allowed. No way. Second time failed, right? So this is again going to happen when you are in the lab and even in the exam, right? So automatic exploitation is always question markable. Why? Because they work at times, they may not work at times. This is the standard rule or a standard thing that you must keep in mind. If the attack is not going to work for the first time, right? You must wait, give it some time, give it a couple of minutes, and again rerun the exploit and see if we can get success. Even after rerunning this exploit for twice or thrice, if it is not working, then there is no way that you can exploit it. You must look for some other alternate to gain access. See, attack is constantly failing. I don't have any hopes anymore, right? Now, if I check sessions, there are no sessions created. Now you need to reconfirm and see what are the ports that you can allow for outbound communication, sorry, for the reverse payload, and see if we can get some success. Note down this point in your notes. With the first run, we didn't have any success. And the port that we have allowed here is 444. We configured for lhost is 444. This is the port that you are going to open on your computer, right? Obviously, when you run jobs, you will be able to see that. Again, I didn't executed this jobs in the background. So immediately after killing that particular session, the actual job is also stopped. So the job will run on this Kali Linux mission on 4444. Can try changing this particular port to something else and see if we can get some success. So let's set L port value to 53 and see if we can get some success. Right? And most of the times you must also think about scans, right? So I was talking about the same. If you perform scans a lot of times on the target mission, that can also crash your target. So you'll not make success on exploitation. So please note that we performed Nmap scan before. We performed aggressive scan on that same Windows mission. We performed the auxiliary related scan, right? Now we are doing this exploitation. So even that thing can cause trouble and you may not get success. I don't think you will get success again. I'm going to break this. Let us reboot this device. Right? My intention here is to show you why attacks fail It is all because of the pre-exploitation activities that we do. More Nmap scans that you do, this is the harm that you are going to cause. IP config, it is 228. Let's go on checking firewall. Firewall is still there. Now let's rerun this exploit. If we are lucky enough, this time we must get a reverse connection from the target. If not, you actually crashed that service. Congratulations. Are you understanding, my dear friends? Hello? There we are. Why I got success this time? Why I failed it before? This is the intention behind explaining you what happens if you do aggressive scan. What happens if you do a lot of other scans well before exploitation. So yesterday also we talked about these things multiple times. I think with this practical proof, you got the idea. Always make sure that you brush up your skills, pre-exploitation skills.
Sir, is it because, sorry to interrupt, is it because we used the reverse connection to 53, that's where it was successful?
Very good question. Not because the reverse connection thing, it is because of Nmap scans that we did. The service was crashed, because of which we are not able to get success.
Okay. Because other thing is even outbound traffic, if it is in unwanted port, the firewalls or the IPS, IDS might trigger.
Block it.
Yes. But I could see that when it is 53 is again what is that, a vulnerable port if it is connecting, establishing outside, but internally that is something acceptable.
Very important. Yeah, right. So let me confirm this. Let's do this. Why to go with imaginations, right? So very good question. It is not because of port 53 that I have used for lhost. Let's try killing the session once again. Now I'm gonna set this to 4444, right? And verify all the options and run the exploit once again. Let's see if we can get some success or not, right? So there are two things that you must remember in this particular scenario. When we exploited the service for the first time, we failed, right? Reason number one, it is because of rigorous scans that you did well before exploiting the target. Next, second point to it is the port number, as you mentioned. When you are performing the exploitation, or especially with reverse payloads, if you want to get a reverse connection, you must make sure that the reverse connection related port is allowed on the target firewall, right? Are you observing that? Even with port 4444, I'm able to get the reverse connection because we didn't wrote any kind of outbound rule here, right? So if I configure an outbound rule not to allow that communication, this is where your personal lab will help you a lot. You can experiment writing a rule and see if you can get success. So this time, going on outbound rule, right, on the port, I can block all things that are going out with 4444, block the connection on all networks, block 4444. Right, so we got this connection from 4444. So if I background this and check sessions once again, you can see I have one session. Now, instead of I'm again going with 4444. I think we'll get some clash because we already have. Let's kill the session. Mission is in our hand. We can actually get the session anytime we want. So I'm going to kill all the previous sessions. There are no sessions. Oops. There are no sessions at all. Oh. Show options. We have all those things configured correctly. And this time I'm setting 4444, right? According to our expectation, what must happen? Are we going to say get success now? Yes or no?
No.
Very good.
Because,
Let's see. Let's see what.
Jen said there is one more question. Like, you know, when we do nmap multiple times, so the success will be down, is it?
Yes, yes. So note down this point in your running notes. It is not for all the services that you are scanning. Nmap is really good at handling all the ports correctly, but because of constantly doing the scan again and again and again and again, just to demonstrate this, I did an aggressive scan before starting this particular pre-exploitation stage, right? So there are certain ports that are very delicate. If you constantly hit them with this nmap, constant probing on those ports can crash those ports. Only for those ports will have some trouble, right? So it is not for all those ports. Obviously, you are seeing we got failed. We are not able to get success.
So what ports are those, Jen said? Like big ports?
So that we cannot say which one is very specific. You can note down SMB, right? SMB is that delicate service. And that all depends on what is the operating system, what is the kernel version, what is the software version that is running on the port, right? So not always we can decide what can be the service. It is not service dependent. It is version of the software that is running on that port, and also the actual operating system on which these services are running. So these two things are to be checked to see whether it is really delicate or not. That is the reason why, rule of thumb, you must always look for easy ways to grab banners instead of using nmap. That's the easiest thing that you can do. So instead of going with nmap, try to check the version details with netcat. You'll make one connection, that's it. If you are using nmap, make sure that you cut down the amount of probes that you are sending onto the target, right? So port specific scan. I think in the last class we discussed about it, but this practical gave you that idea on why it is not good, right? I'm not saying that it is not good, but you need to customize the nmap scan. So without customization, running the scan will cause the damage. Yesterday, I showed you on how you can experiment and see how many probes that it is sending with Wireshark. So do that practice, right? Whenever you are performing nmap scan, try to capture the traffic. So when you are practicing it on any of the boxes, the best thing that you can do is you can experiment with all these things on HSV box 1, right? So I already shared that HSV box. We already did that HS box. Remove that from the list. We have only one box, which I will be discussing in web application module. So HSV box, which was shared a few days before day 2 session, right? You can do this experiment on that box. Try to start that box. Make sure that you rerun all the nmap scans, or else run some aggressive scan, and in the background open Wireshark and see what kind of packets that it is sending, what kind of packets that the target machine is sending, how you can cut down the amount of scans. And best thing is you can read the articles, read the documentation on nmap's official website. So there are tons of options that you can use in nmap, which can make your scan more stealthier and reduce the amount of probes that you are sending, right? So if you are using nmap, you must make sure that you use it to the actual extent of what are the options that you need and what are the details that you are looking for. Don't simply go and run aggressive scan on all ports and see all 1000 ports, all version detection scan. No. This can crash that mission and you will lose the connection. So especially in the exam, you will not have control on yes, you have control on resetting the mission. So knowingly or unknowingly, if you did some mistake, you can reset the mission from the control panel and then you can access it. But most of the people don't know that the scans that they did actually caused the trouble. So they will struck there and they will beat their head and they will never ever get the answer, right? So always keep it very simple. Don't think about complex things at the beginning stage, right? Let's change the L port value and see if we can get success. Again, I did multiple attacks so far. So it is again a question mark. We may or may not get access. So after rebooting the mission, this is the third exploitation that I'm doing. So if the service is already ruined, then you may not get access. So this is the thing, my dear friends, I'm just combining all the three modules as I said before. So if it is perimeter pen testing or network external pen testing, these are the things that we'll do because the perimeter devices will have all these rules, right? Or not allowing you on a specific port or else only allowing you on 2 to 3 different ports. So these are all perimeter rules. But as I have this habit of going with the practicals by linking one thing with other thing, I hope you can easily understand. Is it easy for you to understand? Hello, are you all understanding? Understanding, whatever it may be. So in iLabs, you will have all these things. See, attack again failed, right? Because this one is because of what reason? Is it because of that rule? But because of multiple exploits that we did. Why is this failing this time? We changed the port number because 4444 is blocked there. Outbound rule or egress rules, right? Because of egress rule, we are not able to do it. But what you feel, the reason for failure this time? Hello, what you feel the reason for failure this time?
Looks like multiple exploits run.
Very good, very good.
But,
We did
but in
multiple
exam,
times.
but in exam, if let's say we are reaching to this kind of stage wherein because of the our attempts, we are not able to move further, what would be the option?
Again, resetting the mission from the control panel. In exam, you will have a control panel where you can submit the IP address and click on reset. The mission will be resetted.
Cool. This is the good.
That is the point. So even today, I'll receive a lot of messages. This is what I'm telling. They start the practice range thing and they will see, as everyone know how to use Metasploit, how to use Nmap, they feel so confident and they start running all these scans. They will completely forget about the firewall rules or else any kind of restrictions that may present in the real life scenario. So every tool that you know, you are really good at that. But this simple trick or else the simple logic that we will miss while performing attacks in the firewalled environment will cause this failure. So in practice range or else in the exam range, you can simply reset the mission and redo the attack. But when you are redoing it, please be very careful, right? So correct your mistakes and then get success. That's the only thing. So remaining process is same, right? Picking up the right exploit, running the exploit on the target mission, right? But if you are not getting success, it is because there is some defense. And this is also very important. What if the target actually blocked this particular thing? I mean, in this scenario, we wrote a rule. Let me delete this rule, outbound rule, egress rule. What happened? See, mission is not responding. This is what happens if you run attacks, exploits. Automatic exploitation is always troublesome. See, gone. The only option that I have is to shut down. Right? So automatic exploits always cause a lot of trouble. So in this case, If there is some other alternate for you to do the attack, then it is better to choose that one instead of using these kind of exploits, because exploits are not that reliable. Especially this eternal blue exploit is not that reliable, right? So most of the exploits that you see that are part of Metasploit are not that reliable. I hope I'm not causing the negative impact about Metasploit or Nmap, right? I hope you understand it. Everything that you are going to do must be done with proper knowledge. So let's go with firewall. Open firewall rule. So we wrote an outbound rule. That is the reason why we are not getting outbound connection. That's okay, fine. Right? What if all outbound connections are disabled? There is no way that you can make an outbound connection. Then what you can do? Can anyone tell me? What if I disable this one? So going on private, right? I'm gonna turn on, right, and block all outbound things. Right? What can we do in that case?
Bind.
Very good, very good. You are correct. In that case, the only option is bind. Right? So you can use a bind payload and then get success. So that is very, very important. And even if you are looking at this exploit code, most of these exploits will actually use encoding technique. Right? Most of these exploits, for example, MS08067, I think you have already observed that in CEH module. MS08067 actually uses an encoder. So you can bypass signature-based detection either at the firewall level or else at the host level, antivirus level. But if you are using a reverse payload, you need to use an encoder. I will talk about that in the next practicals that we do, right? But for now, I hope this particular knowledge is enough. And always make sure that if you are not getting reverse connection, try to use bind payload. Even after setting a bind payload, if you are not able to connect to that port, then stop it. There is no way that you can attack it, right? So if I remove this rule here, there is no way that you can attack it. This is the truth to be accepted, right? Services that are running are always not exploitable, not at all, right? Don't think that you can easily exploit everything that is present. In the exam, they will give you questions accordingly, right? So if it is it is not completely like CTF, right? I think somewhere around 30% and 40% are only CTF kind. I mean, you need to do privilege escalation, you need to gain access to get the flag and all. Other questions are just going to test your process. They are not going to ask you to exploit it at any cost. They will just ask you what is the system name or else what kind of exploit you have used. So these kind of questions you can easily answer. So that clearly tells that not all machines are exploitable. So note down these 2 points on the very first page of your notes for this course. Point number 1, always think about defenses. Point number 2, not all vulnerabilities that you are identifying on the target are exploitable. These 2 things must be there in your mind before you proceed with any kind of attack. All right then. So it's time for a short break. Let's break for 15 minutes and we'll see you all after break with the exploitation on this Metasploitable 2 device, right? In a different fashion, using a misconfiguration. Instead of using an exploit code, as you all are already familiar on how to use exploits and get success, let's see on how to exploit it without Metasploit or else see some other misconfiguration and gain access. All right. That being said, we'll see you all at 12. Let's break for 15 minutes. All right, I hope all of you are here. If yes, please drop back in the chat so that we can continue. Very good. All right. Let's move on to yet another technique that you can use on exploiting or gaining access to a machine by abusing some kind of services or permissions that we have. On this Metasploitable 2 device, there is NFS share enabled. If NFS shares are enabled, you can actually mount the disk that is allowing that is actually on sharing and access files that are placed in that particular share. In general, these shares may have some sensitive files, right? And you can take advantage of content that is there in the file, or you can also abuse extreme permissions that are given for you through these shares. To perform a bit of enumeration on this, let's first run a scan and map scan on the target Metasploitable 2 device. So this time, let's run aggressive scan on 192.168.0.207. I think I lost my network. Yes. I don't know why this why my Kali Linux have this issue. Very good. Now it's fine. So if I move to nmap scan, scripts list, anything related to NFS, please list them. Oops, I need to use grep. There are 3 different scripts that are available, which lets me know what kind of shares are enabled on the target. You can also take advantage of client utilities like RPC info, right? This will actually tell you all the RPC ports that are open. And you can also use show mount to see what kind of shares are available. So RPC info with -p, right? And the target's IP address 192.160.0.207 in our case. It lists all different ports that you can see for the RPC thing. And if I run the same exact thing with show mount is yet another system utility. You can see this by default both on Kali and Parrot. So 192.168.0.207. It is telling that you can mount the main root directory from the target Linux machine. So if this is the case, you can try accessing other directories that are present under the main root directory, right? Mostly, if this share is not an authenticated, this particular mount can be done as any user on this local area network. If there is no restriction on what kind of directories that you can traverse from that particular location, you can also access the root main location or user's home location, right? So let's see what we can do with this. Instead of using a lot of different exploits that are available for different services, I think you all know how to exploit VSFTPD, right? SMB service that is running on this. You can also look for exploits for Apache that is running on Metasploitable 2, right? Pro FTPD, you can exploit this one. You can exploit SMB. Almost all different services that you are seeing on Metasploitable 2 are exploitable, right? But our main target for this is 111 port. I'm not going to use any kind of exploit this time. but with the possibility of mounting this particular disk onto my Kali Linux machine, I will try generating some SSH keys and gain access to the target over SSH port. So please take down this particular process. This is an extended process for the practical that is already there in iLabs. So in iLabs, you will see the practical on mounting an NFS share, but you can actually take this forward by uploading some kind of interesting content there and getting a reverse connection from there. Or you can try this generating SSH keys and connecting to the target machine using those SSH keys. So I'm going to use mount utility to mount an NFS share, right, which is present on 192.168.0.207. And what I want to mount, as I can mount the main root directory, right? I can directly mount / onto which location of your computer. Let's mount that onto the mount point here. So on your Kali Linux, you can see /mnt. Mnt is specially meant to mount all different mount points onto your device. So you can see there is nothing under this mount point right now. But after executing this particular command, right, with -no lock, failed. I need to run this as a root user. That's it. We mounted the main root directory, and if I head towards the mount, let me exit and traverse to MNT and list content there. Are you observing that? The entire directory tree of Metasploitable 2 is on my Kali Linux now. This is again a bad permission that was set. So in general, these mount points are configured to allow users on this local network to mount to a specific directory and access some files. But if they are configured to mount the main root directory, and if they are allowed to move into any location from there, for example, I'm there on the main root directory this time. How about moving on to home location? So please note that I'm not writing /home. /home will take you on to Kali Linux home. No, not that one. What I want to move, where I want to move is this home directory inside this mount point. You can see all user home locations there. MSF admin, Metasploit user location. Will I be able to traverse to root? Very good. This root is nothing but Metasploitable 2 root, not my root. It is not Kali Linux root. It is Metasploitable 2 root. If I do ls-la, you can see all different directories that are present. One of those interesting directories is .ssh directory. This is where the SSH keys reside. If you have a private key, right, for which there is an authorized key entry made, then you can connect to this machine without password. So how about generating our own keys this time and then uploading that key here? To do this, let me switch to my Kali Linux, right? So I'm a Kali user here on Kali Linux. Don't get confused. This is Kali Linux terminal and this is kind of Metasploitable 2 terminal, right? In fact, we mounted that disk or the entire directory tree onto Kali Linux. So under mount point, we have Kali Linux, and under this one, we have our actual Kali Linux. So if I head towards this Kali home, sorry, if I list all files and directories that are present here. Right? There is no SSH directory, .SSH directory under the Kali user's home location. So I'm currently there at Kali user's home location. There is no .SSH directory. Let's create a .SSH directory and put some keys, right? Generate some keys. To do that, mkdir.ssh already exists, but I'm not able to see. Is it already there? Yes, it is there. Fine. So let's see what is there inside .ssh. Okay, these are all old keys. Okay, fine. Now to generate these SSH keys, I'm going to use SSH keygen utility. Right? You can specify what type of keys you want to generate. For example, RSA key with a specific size or so, or else you can directly run this command without specifying any kind of algorithm. But for now, let me go and specify RSA. So it is asking me where to save these key pair. Both public key and private key will be generated, where to save them. So I'm going to save them on my Kali Linux home .ssh directory. So I'm going to leave it as it is. So without any password, there we are done. When I do ls, you can see I have a public key and a private key. This is a new key pair that you can use for authentication purpose. So public key should be stored on the server, and you can use your private key to connect to that server. So now we generated these two keys on Kali Linux. But what we want to do is to use these keys for authenticating ourselves with Metasploitable 2. Hello? Are you all understanding? Is it clear up until this point? If yes, please drop P in the chat so that I can proceed. Very good. So let me upload those keys onto the root home, right? So if I go on to this directory, and what I want to do is I want to move this public key, right? So I'm going to do move id underscore rca.pub to which location? Under mount point mnt root. Obviously, I will not have permission to access the root directory. Who will have permission to access the root home? Obviously, root user will have.
Sudo.
So yes, what I can do is switch or perform this as a root user. Do remember, it will check the permissions of the current user. When I add sudo here, I am root user on my Kali Linux. As a root user, I am pushing this onto the root account there, so it will allow. So if I verify whether the keys are present, you can see the key there. Right? I can actually do ls-la. So the key is present, but I want this key to be placed inside this .ssh directory. Again, if I try to move this, I will not be able to do that because I don't have permission. Let's do sudo su. I am root user on Kali Linux. Now if I try moving id underscore rsa.pub onto .ssh directory, we are done. Let me enter .ssh directory on Metasploitable 2. I hope you are able to see the differences between where I am performing what. So this time I want to cat the content of id underscore rsa pub, right? Into, I want to append this onto authorized keys. Now the keys that we have generated can be used for authentication purpose. The private key is with us. Public key we actually pushed on to the authorized keys. Now I can use this private key to authenticate myself with the target. How to do this? Let's see. From Kali Linux home, right, or Kali Linux terminal, I'm running SSH to authenticate myself with the target metasploitable to device using key, SSH key. So SSH-I specifying where the key is. Key is under SSH directory ID underscore RSA. Using this key, authenticate me to the target as root user on 192.168.0.207. Let's see what happens. I think the actual problem is with that SSH configuration file on my Kali Linux. To resolve this issue, you need to add this line onto your Kali Linux client configuration. So let me show you the actual line that you must add. So you will not be able to connect until and unless you edit your Kali Linux configuration file. So even if I try connecting to the target as MSF admin, see, I will not be able to do it. So I need to change the configuration of client on my Kali Linux. So let's do that. Please take down the process to fix this issue. On your Kali Linux, edit SSH config file, which is located under, so I'm going to use nano, or you can also use leaf pad or mouse pad. So sudo nano /etc/ssh/ssh_config. In this file, go to the end of this particular file, and you must add these two lines at the end of your configuration file. So let me paste it here and also in the chat for your reference. Must add these two lines. So once done, save this configuration. Now let's see if I can connect. Yes, right. I can connect as Metasploit MSF admin user, but that is not what we want to do. Hello. Who am I on the target? Root user. No password required. You gained access as a root user directly. What is the misconfiguration? Hello?
NFS mount.
Very good. So
Permissions.
yes, very good. Permissions. So enabling NFS mount is one thing, and permissions. For example, you cannot avoid certain functionality. See, you need to take advantage of NFS for sure to share some kind of files in your network. That is kind of advantage that you have. But restricting users from not allowing them to traverse to other directories, you can't do that. See what are the things that users must access, right? Only allow them to access those things. Don't give them extreme permissions. Don't feel like they don't misuse it. They may, right? Knowingly or unknowingly, they may do it. Even if your employees are not doing, there is a chance that someone from outside or attacker who compromise the network can take advantage of the simple technique, very simple technique, right? And gain access to any device that is part of your network. Placing sensitive files on public locations, which are accessible for everyone on this local network or the public network, is not at all good. Or else you can take advantage of restricting users for SSH access. For example, I allowed them to mount, right? That's okay, fine. But what if I restrict them on not using authentication from a specific IP address, or else block all these IP addresses not to connect to SSH, right? On this network. Only specific IP addresses are allowed to connect to this network. Or you can also restrict remote login for root user. Remote login for root user must be disabled, right? I think this is a common configuration on all the Linux machines, but I think key-based login will be enabled. So we can actually check that. So let me go and cat the content of etc ssh daemon sshd.sshd-conf. You can see password authentication, yes. Permit empty passwords, yes. Authorized keys. Where is root login? Permit root login. Why you enabled this? If you restrict this, obviously the root user will not be able to make remote logins. Let's check that. I'm gonna edit this configuration file. See, interesting. I am doing this configuration, secure configuration, after gaining access to the target machine. Nano not there. Or else let's do it here itself on Metasploit Ubuntu. So this is the advantage that you can have with the lab under your control, right? So I'm not going to allow root users to log in. No. I need to restart the service. I think I need to do systemctl.
It's SSHD.
Yes, you're right. I think even the service command is not present. I can't see. Service is not there. Service command is not found. So I think we can do it with systemctl. Let's see. Oops. Systemctl is also not present. Very bad. No problem. Sudo reboot. Quick fix. Now after reboot, let's try if I can connect with these keys. So if you have lab in your hand, these are the advantages that you can have. Yes, I think you can use initd to restart. The thing is, we must get all these ideas at the same time. You can actually use initd to restart. So this is kind of old version of Linux. So common utilities on the normal machine may not work here. (207) asking password. We don't know password. Even though I'm able to mount the disk, I will not be able to get the reverse SSH connection. When can someone know all these things? Only if they do the right pen test. After pen test, you identified that this is a possibility, right? So next, you will write these recommendations in your pen test report, and the network administrator will fix them by setting up the right configuration. Right? These are all things that you can do.
Sir, okay. Still we can go and edit the file, right? See,
which one?
Still, if I may, you have removed the root access.
Yes, I
still
can go and
the
set it for. Yes, I can do it for a normal user and gain access to a normal user and then elevate my privileges from there. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, now
Yes,
see,
yes.
now the root is not there, but the complete file system was able to come in.
Access.
We were able to mount it. So we
Yes.
can push the configuration, how we push the key into the root, the SSH, then again that will be enabled, right?
Yes, you are correct. That is possible. This is what you must check for all different possibilities and see how you can fix it, how to strengthen it, how to harden the security. You got it right. So let us imagine that this is not a possibility for us. What are the other things that we can do? Let us unmount this particular disk using umount command, or yes, umount with -f l and specifying the location. All right. Let's imagine that this is not a possibility for us. What are the other things that we can do? We can simply go and take advantage of checking SMB shares that are present. Using SMB client, if I run -l, okay, there is a possibility for us to connect as an anonymous user. Again, this is a threat. In what way? If I can put some files there, I can put some PHP code or something else. Why PHP code? Because Metasploitable 2 have a web server. This web server is actually running PHP code. The PHP code that I have placed under SMB location, if I can traverse to that particular location using any of the vulnerabilities on the web application, then I can do that. You all know how to go with local file inclusion, remote file inclusion. In fact, there is a vulnerable application running on Metasploitable 2 with local file inclusion there. Why can't we put a reverse payload there and get the reverse connection? That is one way. The possibilities are enormous. Yet another thing that you can do is this web service or the web server have web dev functionality enabled. Oh. So on this web server, you can actually access web dev. If web dev is enabled, you can upload files here. Directory listing is enabled. You can actually access the files directly from here. So these are all possibilities for us to take advantage of compromising the target. Let's do this. I'm gonna check if there is a possibility for us to connect to that file share. Of course, here it is temp. You can actually check the permissions using different switches with SMB client, or you can also use SMB map. These are all tools that come pre-built with Kali Linux. SMB map specifying the host details 192.168.0.207, right? Very good. As you can see, temp, we have read and write permissions. If we have read and write permissions, why wait? SMB client 192.168.0.207 temp as an anonymous user. I am into that mission now. maybe I am not there with the shell or a terminal prom bash that I can use for executing normal commands, but there is a possibility that you can escalate this to a reverse connection, right? If there is a possibility for us to execute the payload that is present here, you can get a reverse connection using Metasploit. Create a simple MSFNM payload, put that here. See if there is a command execution vulnerability on this web application somewhere, you can get a reverse connection. Hello? Are you understanding what are the possibilities that we can have? In this case also, we are not using any kind of exploit. We are just abusing all the misconfigurations. Let's see if we can get some success on putting some file here and get the reverse connection, because I found that there is WebDAV enabled. So this is how you need to map. But will I be able to put this file that I want to create now inside the DAV directory there on the target web server? That we need to check. So can I move to var www html dav? No, you don't have the permission to move to that directory. So the thing that I thought about getting a reverse connection from this WebDAV is not going to work. I must somehow trigger the payload that I place here. Is there any web application that can help me execute the code on the target? If you head towards DVWA, right? So this is the default application that comes pre-built with your Metasploitable 2. So admin password. I hope you all used DVWA before. Hello? So there is a command execution vulnerability. Hello? Are you all there, my dear friends? Okay. So DVWA is a vulnerable application that comes pre-built with Metasploitable 2. Anyhow, we'll talk about these things again in web application module. I'll cover a few most important vulnerabilities there. So there is a command injection vulnerability. Using this command injection vulnerability, you can get a reverse connection from this server by simply taking advantage of uploading some malicious payload here and executing that payload from this point. I can take advantage of getting a reverse connection onto my Metasploit framework. These are all kind of advanced type of attacks that you can think. I mean, it is not that advanced, but not the traditional way of getting a reverse connection. These things are very handy, even in case of external or internal pen testing, where there are certain restrictions. Are you getting my point? So never ever always stick yourself to the actual exploit codes that you always wanted to use. So with this thing said, let me bring my Windows 7 once again, and let us try to exploit yet another service on the same Windows 7 device. This time, I want to exploit yet another popular vulnerability in RDP service of the target device, which is BlueKeep. So for this particular service to work, we need to have RDP port open, which is again quite common, right? So we are not talking about any other service that is not commonly opened on all different devices. You're talking about only the services that are commonly open and allow connections from different computers on the network and off the network. So in general, this particular mission is not there with RDP enabled. So to keep it very simple, I'm going to disable the firewall first. Right? I think even if there is a firewall, it will not hurt because RDP connections are always allowed. So let me go and enable RDP service on this device. So I'm going to enable RDP service. Let's see if I can connect to that RDP service. Our desktop. I hope you all know how to connect to the remote desktop service. This is very important because even in the exam environment or in the practice range, you must frequently take RDP connections to the Windows machines to perform specific tasks. So 192.168.0.228, if I'm not wrong, that is the same exact IP address that we used before. Very good. We have RDP properly working. So even if the firewall is turned on, it is allowing all RDP connections, right? So with this RDP port open, we can go and check what kind of vulnerabilities that the RDP port can have. So if I do a little bit of Googling, let us imagine that I don't know anything specific about that service. I didn't perform Nmap scan. I don't know what is the version of the RDP service running, right? Didn't perform any kind of script scan and so on. It is all blind guesses that I want to make this time, right? Different from what we did before. So I'm going to search like RDP service remote code execution exploits. Again, it is time for research to go on reading about all different articles that you see here. So Print Nightmare is yet another popular one, which have the CVE code of 2021, very latest one. Especially useful in case of Active Directory environment. If you want to exploit the devices on Active Directory environment and do some kind of privilege escalation, Print Nightmare is one thing. So vulnerability in RDP service, CVE 2019, I think this is the one that I was talking about, 0706 Eternal Blue. So at this point, you may have a question like, you already know that it is Eternal Blue, so you are searching for it. So how we can search for it? How many of you have this question in the mind right now? Is that me raising this question or else you already have this question in your mind? Okay. Okay. So this comes with practice, right? There is no shortcut method. I don't have any superpower on directly going and picking that exploit and telling that, yes, this machine is vulnerable for this. No. Now I demonstrated that how you can identify Eternal Blue and exploit it. We saw all ins and outs for that particular exploit, where it will fail, where it will not fail, how to get success on it, what is that actual vulnerability, where it works, how to enumerate it before you start exploiting it, right? If you keep on seeing this kind of service again and again, will you exploit it or not? You can easily exploit it. No one must tell you that this is the exploit you must use to exploit the service. Next time when you see SMB, obviously you will directly go on enumerating these things. I mean, executing the same exact commands and then try to figure out where to exploit it with the right exploit code. If you see Drupal 7, will you be able to exploit it? Yes or no? Hello? Are you all there? Yes, you can exploit it because you already know the process. You know what is the exploit that you can use, right? This is all practice. So the same way, if I say that this is the one that you can use, I'm saying it after reading tons of articles on this particular service, this is the research that you must put in, right? CPENT, you need to spend a lot of time, dig deeper, do own research, right? So no one can actually give you complete understanding about all different services, but there are tons of resources online from where you can acquire the skill or acquire this knowledge. So after spending a lot of time reading all different articles here, searching for different exploits. So one of those two good resources is hacking articles. I highly recommend you all going on hacking articles. I think most of you already know this. So on this website, there are tons of articles that really help you in understanding different exploitation techniques. You can go on pen testing section. There are so many articles. Guide to exploit log4j. I really appreciate their efforts where they actually help you on setting up the lab and also doing that actual exploitation. See, there are so many articles, right? From the basic ones to the advanced ones. In the last session, we have seen how to use find for privilege escalation. You can use SCP for privilege escalation, SOCAT for privilege escalation, PIP for privilege escalation, right? Tons of articles. So I hope most of you already know this, but let me drop this in the chat. So reading through articles and doing independent research about each and every service will give you this idea on whether we can exploit it or not. If yes, what is the technique or what is the way to exploit it? Got it? So after reading this article, I came to know that, okay, this is how it is functioning, right? You need to understand what it is doing. So these are the things that you must know if you want to get into the advanced level of pen testing. So bypassing defenses is not that simple. You cannot go and get a tool and then run that command there to bypass all the defenses. No, right? So offensive process and defensive process go hand in hand. Whenever you find some kind of offensive method, obviously there will be some defensive method, right? So it is always important for us to put efforts towards research and learn what this exploit is doing, how it is going to work, and so on. Anyhow, now we have the CVE code. You can do research. I mean, you can search for the exploit codes based on this. So if I go on Google, is this, search for exploit. You can see there are tons of material for this one also. Rapid7 is the standard resource. If you see some article on Rapid7, it means that there is a Metasploit module for it, right? You can use that Metasploit module, or you can also go on to the website that I've mentioned in the last class, ExploitDB, search for this with CVE, right? Or you can go on advanced search, apply filters and search for that CVE. You may get some more exploits. So on Rapid7, right, I can see complete article and the exploitation process too, right? So this is the actual methodology for identifying vulnerabilities and looking for perfect exploit codes that will work for us on gaining access to the target. All right. So it is taking a long time. I think we need to change the keywords. You can actually go on filters and search based on the CVEs also. So if I go on advanced search, I can search based on CVE. A search based on CVE may return exploit related to Bluekeep. So not to waste time, let's go on MSF console and search for Bluekeep. I will tell you the reason why I picked this specific exploit. During the session, I pick only specific exploits because each and every exploit works in a different fashion. There are certain options that you need to configure, right? Then only the exploit will work. For this exploit to work, So blue keep. Do remember this is RDP service. If I go on showdown.io, yes, you can see there are so many blue keep related exploits that are present. So this one is part of Metasploit. So you can see Metasploit in brackets. So other ones are not part of Metasploit. So if you want to avoid Metasploit route altogether, you can go on using any of these things. But don't worry, in my CPENT exam, there is no restriction. You can actually use whatever framework that you want to use. You can freely use Metasploit for multiple times. It's not like OSCP where there is a restriction on usage. So there is RDP service open. See this particular server out there on the internet, you can directly connect. So if I use R desktop, boom, some public server out there on the internet, I'm able to directly connect to it. If you have enumerated properly, right, on this domain, you may find the hints for IDs and passwords. You can directly log in and control. What if this particular computer is part of a domain? If it is part of the domain, you can escalate your privileges on this mission and perform some kind of lateral movement to move on to other devices on the network. I'll show you that in the next part, which is all about Active Directory. But for now, my intention is to show you that there are RDP ports open for public. You must restrict amount of access on the network as a network administrator, as a security engineer, right? That can cut down more possibilities for someone to exploit. Anyhow, these are all tests that you are doing. It is all about the plan that you have in hand and what are the services that you want to test. So take it as a habit from now on. So solving missions will give you this idea. So you cannot go and get a standard prescription and follow that prescription to learn the entire process in the order, but you need to build the process on your own. So solving missions will tell you how you can actually exploit the services. Whenever you find a new exploit, write that onto your running notes. So I hope as you are all writing the notes for this particular module, I keep on adding new things onto this notes. Whenever you find a new exploit, write down the exploit name, where the exploit code is present, what kind of exploit is it, right? All the differences that we actually mentioned the start point of today's session. Note down what kind of exploit it is, what kind of access that you can get with that exploit. So this database will help you later to cut down the time and directly jump onto the actual exploitation step. So that is kind of practice. So day by day, whenever you are going with new services. So today, let us take SSH. Do research on identifying what kind of attacks that I can do through SSH. What kind of security settings that I can make to guard against all these attacks, right? So how I can modify the SSH config file, same as what I've showed you before. So if you have your own lab setup, you can also test the firewall rules. What kind of firewall rules can lock someone from not getting success for this attack? What kind of restrictions that I can make in the configuration file for the concerned service to block them from not getting the success? So let's proceed with this practical and see how we can get success and how we can restrict them from not performing it. So whenever I go for training, people always ask me for defenses. That is the reason why I always wanted to map both the things. So showing you the attack along with the defense, right? So generally there is no one specific way to apply the defense. It all depends on your own organization network structure. There are multiple layers that you can add. So that all depends on your personal choices. So if I say close RDP, will you close RDP? Why you will close? Without any proper reason, right? So you must think, is this service really useful for us? If it is really useful, you will put some restriction. If it is really not useful, you can shut down. You can follow my instruction, right? This is why there is no standard recommendation all the time. You must always take advantage of checking what kind of principles, what kind of requirement that your organization have, and based on that, you must do it. So as a penetration tester, when you are writing the conclusion, I actually missed out that particular section in the last session where we wrote the complete document, right? At the end of the document, we must write the recommendations also, right? So for those, for that particular practical, you take it as an assignment and see whether you can write all the recommendations, right? So we saw all the exploitation techniques in the last class for the HS box, right? You write the recommendation for each and every service that you found. So for FTP, what you can do to guard against the attack. For HTTP, what you can do to guard the attack. So for the actual admin user ad, right, what you can do. So you can write all the recommendations. As a penetration tester in the report, you must also write the recommendations. That really impresses the evaluator even in the CPENT exam, right? So make your report as detailed as possible so that anyone who is looking at this report must repeat the same exact steps to complete the actual attack and understand the risk, and then also take your inputs on deciding whether they can apply the right fixes or not. So going on searching for Blue Keep. There are two modules again. This one is auxiliary to check whether the target is vulnerable or not. So I'm not going to waste time. So you can actually go and check. So in this case, I know that the target is really vulnerable, but I don't know whether it is exploitable or not, right? So let's load this attack module, which is going to perform remote code execution. Verify options, set our host to 192.168.0.228, if I'm not wrong. Let's cross check. Why to waste time? To 28. Run exploit. Failed. But wait, why failed? So exploit aborted due to failure. Bad configuration. Set most appropriate target or manually. So for this, pardon?
The port number, just
Port number is not at all a problem here. So in case of fail exploit, RDP port is configured and RDP port is already opened on the target. So this is correct.
Okay.
And in case of reverse payload, we didn't configure any kind of rule, right? I think we removed that rule for from the firewall before. Let me cross check. Thanks for letting me know. Let's check the firewall rule, outbound rule. 44. Okay. Let's remove this rule. Right. So the port number must not be a trouble now. So this port is open on our computer and the target will come with that requirement and we'll get the connection. But according to the message here, right, it is telling that the target is not appropriate. Are you observing this section, the third section in the Metasploit options? It is telling automatic targeting via fingerprinting. This exploit is unable to pick the right target. That is the reason why attack failed, right? Of course, this can be the second reason where we blocked that port 4444 for outbound, right? But I removed it for now to keep it simple, as you already know what you can do with that aggressive rule and ingress rule and egress rule. Now it is time for us to think about how you can change this target. So show targets will show what kind of targets are available. Automatic fingerprinting failed on detecting what is the exact version of Windows So it is unable to target or exploit it. So in our case, it is a virtual machine running on VirtualBox. So let us set the target to 2, right? So the ID of the target is 2. So I'm going to set the target to 2 and rerun the exploit. If we are lucky enough, we must be able to get access. Do remember, both Eternal Blue and Blue Keep are going to give you remote administrator access on Windows machine. This is quite interesting. Remote exploit, the two, a privileged exploit. Very good. We got the success. Right?
But how
So
it
thanks.
picks the IP address?
Pardon?
How it picked the IP address of the target?
We added that IP address of the target, right? Our host. We already set the target's IP address.
Okay, so it is taking both. Like here it is our host. Then down below you again did run this set command, right? Set target. Then
I executed it only once.
set target 2. Okay, fine. So,
Set target is different and setting our host is different.
fine.
So here we said that this is the address of the machine. And here we are saying that it is Windows 7 running on VirtualBox because the exploit works in that way. It must know what is the platform on which it is running. Is it the host machine or virtual machine? Because the method of exploiting it will be slightly different. So that is the reason why it failed before. So thanks for letting me know, Mr. Samir. If you have not said that, again, our attack used to fail because we blocked 4444. Right? And from there onwards, you already know on how you can get success. But now this is how you can take advantage of exploiting services that are running on the target. So it is running as NT Authority, a service account with highest privilege on Windows. These two exploits are very interesting because it gives administrator access directly onto the target machine. Unfortunately, it is not part of the domain, but you can take advantage of exploiting a mission that is part of Active Directory environment, right? Using this as an initial attack vector. And after gaining access, you can do some lateral movement from there. So let's move on to the theory part for Active Directory and we'll break for lunch, right? After that, I will take you on to Windows 10 exploitation and we'll see what we can do after gaining access to a Windows 10 device. So how many of you are familiar with Active Directory environment? If you are familiar with Active Directory environment, please drop F in the chat. And if you are completely new, please drop A in the chat. All right, I can see that most of the attendees are new. So Active Directory is like a database. I mean, to keep it very simple, right? Let us discuss the fundamental requirement of why we need to go with Active Directory. Let us imagine that you are part of an organization where there are around 1,000 machines, 1,000 Windows machines. Each and every machine is configured with different settings, where each and every machine have its own local users and administrator accounts on it. Same as our Linux machines, where there will be root, there will be some users. If you are going to log into your computer that is dedicated for you, right? You can actually perform all the operations there. Sooner or later, you got an opportunity to work with a bigger company and you are going to leave this organization. What the administrator must do? Administrator must immediately remove your account from the devices that are part of this organization. How many devices are there? 1,000 machines. During your tenure in this organization, you have used all these machines multiple times. You left your account details or configured your account on multiple devices, right? Now it is really a big headache for administrator to identify on which machines you created account and used the computer. If he is not removing your account from this environment, the chances are someone who know your password, or else you can become an internal threat, right? So you can turn against this organization later. After you leave this organization, somehow you know all the information on how all ins and outs of that organization, right? You can actually take a remote connection towards this local network and start controlling computers, which is not good for that organization anymore, right? As you left this organization, you can actually cause some more damage to it. Who knows? Now it becomes a big headache for administrator to manage user accounts, users on this particular network. Not only that, let us imagine that you have the same exact 1,000 machines, where few machines in this network, in these 1,000 machines are web servers, few are database servers, and few are local client machines. On these client machines, if you can actually take advantage of logging into any machine, right? As you have your login details in hand, then the process of updating these servers will be simple for you. I mean, as an administrator, you have an account on this network. You can simply log into any of the devices on this network and update a database server or a web server. Not only one single computer that is dedicated for you. In this scenario, even if you leave this organization, administrator can simply remove your account, right? If everything is centralized. So Active Directory is that kind. A centralized database from where you can control all different components in this network. When I say different components, it can be users or groups that they belong to, servers, accounts, services, computers, everything. In Active Directory terminology, we set up something called as OUs, organizational units, under which we'll have all these components. So computers, users, groups, and all. All this piece of information is stored in one single computer called as domain controller. And domain controller is called as a heart of this Active Directory. A centralized management of all different resources or infrastructure, right, is going to be very simple if you want to take advantage of automating certain activities or put restrictions on all different computers at once by simply issuing a restriction or else setting up that setting on one single computer. There are so many things associated with Active Directory, which is not possible for us to go on. But let us stick to the content that is part of this course and understand some fundamental attacks that you can do in Active Directory. Again, this is nothing completely different from normal attacks that you are doing. So if computers are separated, then you must actually enumerate them individually. But in case of Active Directory, everything is centralized. Means one single user can log into any computer if he is part of that domain. We'll call it as a domain. If he is part of that domain, he can actually communicate, he can actually log into any of the machines that are part of this domain. So how this authentication process is taken care by, this authentication process is taken care by your domain controller. Whenever you are trying to authenticate to this particular computer, a request was sent to the domain controller to verify whether you are the actual domain user or not. If you are the right domain user, you can log into this computer and access all your content directly from that domain controller. From offensive point of view, this is going to be very interesting. Why? Now, one single computer that you compromise, you have access to all different computers on the network. Hello? Are you understanding? Previously, if we have access to one single user, that is for only that particular computer. But now, one single domain user access that you have, you can log into any computer, including the domain controller. Hello? Got it? This play is all with misconfigurations again. Gaining initial foothold can happen through client-side attack or server-side attacks that I mentioned before. For example, if the same exact Windows 7 is part of a domain, right? You can exploit that remote, eternal blue or exploit eternal blue or else a blue keep and gain access to the Windows machine. If you gain access to the Windows machine as an administrator, which we actually did right now, you can start enumerating or dump some hashes that are stored on the Windows machine. To allow this process to work, right, off this domain controller, all these local computers will hold some hashes. Dumping these hashes and cracking those hashes can give you access to the user credentials. He can be a domain user or also normal user. So if he is a domain user, you can take advantage of those credentials to log into any computer on that network. Only thing that you need to have an idea of is number of computers that are part of this network. If you can have the count on the number of computers that are part of the network, you can simply connect to that service that is running on the target device with these credentials, you're done. So when compared with the normal environment, Active Directory environment is very convenient for attacks. So we'll see on how we can do that by simply taking advantage of a client-side attack that I was talking about since yesterday's session, like Office Word thing, right? We'll do that after break. After we complete the process of gaining access to the target, we can simply perform some kind of enumeration on that computer. Same as what we did for Windows 7, we got administrator access, right? So on that administrator terminal, you can simply jump onto the shell and run all the Windows commands like this for enumerating the domain environment. Once you have the domain environment in hand, you can take advantage of dumping hashes, doing a lot of different types of attacks, which are out of scope for this particular course, but I will give you resources from where you can grab all that content. Anyhow, for this particular module or for this particular course, there are few interesting attacks that you can perform with the dumped hashes. One of those things is pass the hash attack. And this is the same exact thing that you will see even in the practical lab, right? There are only 2 practicals that are part of the iLab platform. But if you have access to the practice range, you can actually do a lot of different types of attacks there. Anyhow, we'll see on how we can perform that by compromising one of those devices in the Active Directory environment setup that I have on my local lab. With that thing said, it's time for lunch. My dear friends, let's break for lunch and we'll see you all at 2:10 and we'll continue with the last part of today's session on exploiting Windows 10 mission and taking advantage of doing the Active Directory related attacks, right? And with that, we'll wrap up for today. And next session, we'll continue with the pivoting concepts, right? There is a short theory that I want to cover as part of this perimeter pen testing. We'll complete that in today's second half. All right. So mostly we'll wrap up at 4:30. So please make sure that you join me again sharp by 2:10 so that we can complete it at a faster rate. All right, then it's time for break. Let's break for 1 hour and we'll see you all at 2:10.